That's the sound of your current hype level at the gas pump. But brace yourself for something fuel nominal, because Unleaded 88 is about to take the hype to a whole new level. Unleaded 88 is cheaper, cleaner, and greener than regular unleaded. Plus, it's homegrown, making Unleaded 88 the clear choice at the pump and totally worth the hype. So pump it up with Unleaded 88, brought to you by Iowa Corn.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony, air quotes, Nippy, Ames.
And this is A Little Bit Culty, a podcast about what happens when things that seem like a great thing at first go bad.
Every week, we chat with survivors, experts, and whistleblowers for real cult stories told directly by the people who lived through them.
Because we want you to learn a few things we've had to learn the hard way.
Like, if you think you're too smart to get sucked into something culty, you're already prime recruitment material.
You might even already be in a cult.
Oops. You better keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Season 6 of A Little Bit Culty.
Welcome back to ALBC, everybody.
All right, culty listeners, if you've been paying attention, and I know you have, you'll recognize that we've already covered school before in our episode with Spencer Schneider, who detailed his journey back from the brink in his extremely readable memoir, Manhattan Cult Story, my unbelievable true story of sex, crimes, chaos, and survival. Hi, Spencer, if you're listening.
Virtual fist bump. And listeners, be sure to check out that episode if you haven't already. We'll also link it in our show notes. But if you're not already familiar with the culty clusterfuck known as school, I'm doing the bunny quotes right now, please note the capital S on that basic noun.
Red flag.
Red flag. Huge red flag. Major red flag. Right, Sarah?
High five.
Here's a quick recap. School was an ultra-secret Manhattan organization run by the now-deceased actress and wackily charismatic leader, Sharon Gans. The shadowy group did its dark magic in the form of secret study groups, arranged marriages, and some pretty gnarly narcissistic abuse.
Our guest today is another alum of school. Esther Friedman is here to talk about the 5 years she spent in that secret study group, which love-bombed her right into its clutches, how she got out, and what it means to heal after culty abuse, especially when you're a sweet soul.
And she has some wisdom to share. She's a licensed mental health counselor these days, and her memoir, The Gentle Soul's Revolution, is a PSA/recovery guide/template for anyone who has navigated their way through and out of exploitative relationships. She's the platonic ideal of a little bit culty guest.
Listen a little, learn a little, laugh a little, live, laugh, love.
And empaths, this episode is especially for you.
So let's get into it, gentle souls and a little bit culty listeners. Here's our chat with Esther Friedman. Welcome, Esther Friedman, to A Little Bit Culty.
Hi, Sarah and Nippy. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks for being here.
I've been saying this a lot recently. It was a long time coming because we've been in touch since the vow, I think.
Wow.
It's been a while. Yeah, Sarah and I have been going back and forth for a while over text, a few phone calls, this and that. And actually, Sarah, I was listening to your book on Audibles, and I think I contacted you after that. It took everything I could to not text you every 2 minutes going, oh my God, oh my effing God.
A lot of similarities. So just full disclosure, usually one of us reads the book and the other one does different research so that we are coming at the interview from different approaches. You had parts of the book.
Yeah.
I read the whole book, which I love, by the way, and we'll be promoting it. Maybe we can even do a giveaway or something.
That'd be great. Thank you.
If you feel so inclined. I knew about the school already, and we'll get into that in a second because of our episode of Spencer Schneider. What I didn't know, and it's rare for me these days to read a cult memoir and find something totally new. It's like, oh, that's the same, that's the same, that's the same. But what I didn't know was this term.
Gentle souls. Yeah, we felt like if we're going to start this off, we could define our terms and have you get into gentle soul.
You didn't know it because that's really my term. It's something I've constructed and, based on my own life experience, which, there were plenty of narcissistic misadventures before school, but then also my clients and friends who, this specific profile, like a very empathic person who takes a lot of emotional responsibility, like far more than they should. Person who is very idealistic and whose principles kind of revolve around, let's make the world a better place. And they're perfect candidates for cults in that way, because I think it's hard for most people to accept that there are really pathologically selfish people in the world. Like it almost seems like something out of, a movie that doesn't exist in real life. But I think there's a shock in realizing, actually, this person will squeeze everything out of me that they can. But I think for people who fit this profile of gentle soul, that it's so far out of their conception of how people relate that it makes them quite vulnerable.
Well, I think it's definitely important to bring up here because I certainly related to that as you were talking about it. And not only that, our upbringing, there's one particular line that you said about like an idealistic kid daydreaming in class, usually about a utopian world in which no one went homeless or hungry. And it's almost like reading your book kind of triggered some memories for me. Like I had a memory and people talk like, what's your childhood like? I'm like, well, I was raised by these like, hippie parents and about, creating a world of more peace. But like specifically what you said, it sort of brought up that memory of like, and me wishing for that. So I really related to the idealism in a different way when you described your childhood. And I think that would be really helpful for a lot of people who are listeners who are survivors.
Yeah. I like how you just phrased that, like you're wishing for that, like you can remember being a kid and thinking someday everything's going to be super peaceful and we're all going to get along and everyone's going to have everything that they need. And, it's unfortunately just not realistic, but there's nothing wrong with hoping for that.
Mm-hmm.
I know my growing up years were filled with people telling me I was too sensitive and I thought too much. And I assume that, that is true for many people who are really empathic. And the thing is, you can't change that wiring, so you grow up feeling like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I shouldn't be so sensitive. I shouldn't think so much. And you can't turn it off. Since you read the book, Sarah, you know that I was not adulting well. And most of the reason I was not adulting well is because I had no confidence. And you need confidence to survive this world.
At the same time, the world needs people that have that empathetic sensibility to them. In a lot of ways, those people are the conscience of the world. And in many ways, make them susceptible to the con, because if someone understands that about you, and this is a conversation I've had 3 to 4 times in the last week that I had a lot, is like, how does this happen? And one of the things that allows people like that to thrive, and this is actually something that was in our curriculum, is the sociopath knows what it's like to be you, and you don't know what it's like to be them. So you can't project that kind of malintent into them. And they know that you can't because you have that empathetic aspect to you. And that's what they're manipulating.
Yeah, it's an opportunity for someone who's got those sociopathic proclivities. It's like, I know how this person ticks. I know how to present myself to this person. And I know this person is going to extend the benefit of the doubt to me.
I was going to ask this later, but since you just said it, is that the truth to fault principle?
Yeah, that is the truth to fault mode. Yeah, which Malcolm Gladwell's book, Talking to Strangers, which I just dug into in the same way I dug into the Lifton book, because it made so much sense to me that truth to fault, maybe I should explain a little bit, is this sociological concept or theory that people, for the most part, unless you are pathological, go through life extending the benefit of the doubt to other people. They assume that you are being honest and trustworthy, and you stop doubting that only when you've gathered enough evidence, which is exactly what happened for me with school. And I hear it over and over again. I obsessively listen to your podcast and all the other podcasts about cults. And, there's that, is it Breaking the Shelf that Janja Lalich talks about, where it's like you get enough evidence to go, okay, I've been having doubts all along and something niggly has been poking at me. And now I'm realizing that my doubts were right.
Right. I want to circle back to that. First, our audience knows we've already dug into this particular school or called the school or the Odyssey study group or lots of different names. But let's just go back to at least the key moments following our podcast formula. And I love the way you call it your misadventure. And I think that's a great sort of light way to bring levity to it, as you do so beautifully in your book. So where did this misadventure start? How did you get targeted? What was the hook that your friend introduced you to?
And by the way, I do use that word very intentionally because one, it does bring some levity to it. And also it takes the sting of blame, victim blame out of it.
Right.
Just this crazy fucking thing that happened to me. Can I swear?
Oh, please.
Have you heard my potty mouth? You are safe here, Esther.
Okay, well, fantastic. Then I'll just dive in. So I moved to Boston in 1989. I came here for graduate school. I mean, the crazy thing is I came here to study expressive art therapy. So I had the therapy background before this happened, which, includes a lot of talk about power differentials, So I say that because you can have the education and still stumble into these things, and I think it's important to recognize that. But I was very confused by my career choice because of many things, a lot having to do with being a gentle soul. I mean, a lot of what was implemented in work were behavioral approaches that were very antithetical to me, that seemed cold and callous. And so, I was starting to think about other career choices. My relationship history was, shall we say, inauspicious, and nothing was working. Like all of those hallmarks of adulthood were not working. So leading up to that, I'm faced with, I will say, another breakup, another drama-filled, inauspicious breakup. And I was 41, so I was just hitting that peak of existential angst. Like, I'm entering my 4th decade on the planet and I cannot figure out how to be an adult. The things I want are not that crazy. Like, I'd like a partner. I'd like a job that seems meaningful to me. I'd like to have some money. And I'm not achieving that. And I just can't figure it out. Then, I'm heading into a breakup. So that's the lead up. And I am at Whole Foods feeling sorry for myself and picking up breakup snacks, by the way, because because I was about to have a summit with my soon-to-be ex-boyfriend, and I'm standing in line feeling sorry for myself, and this woman with her 2 kids and her husband standing behind me asked me a question, and, you can read the book to hear more of the details of this, but just engaged me, in this conversation. And then her husband joined in, and it was really quick. Like, suddenly I'm learning that they're also artists because I have a lot of artistic background, obviously, expressive arts therapy. I'm trying to bring in the creativity into my work. And, I don't know, it might have been like a 5 or 10 minute conversation. We're walking out to the parking lot together, and this woman says, I've really enjoyed talking to you. We should get together sometime, let's exchange phone numbers. And we did. And then it was like a month-long kind of grooming process. And during that process, this woman never even mentioned a group. We were just friends. We were going out for coffee. We were going to the museum. We were meeting for lunch. And there were a lot of things about it that were red flags and made me uncomfortable. And I was also just in such a crisis that, she was listening to me and I was yammering on and on and on, and she was gathering the data.
What would later become the secret files, right?
Yeah.
The one-way data gathering.
It was, because she wasn't telling me much about herself at all, which made me uncomfortable. And I said to her one day, I don't know why I talk so much about myself with you. I usually don't do that. And I asked her how she met her husband, and she shut it down. She was like, oh, we met in an acting class. So the gentle soul Midwesterner in me, because I grew up in Cleveland, Boston has a very different sensibility.
Yes, it does. That's being diplomatic.
I don't have that reference point as a Canadian. What's the difference? Tell me.
Well, Midwestern people are kind of polite and friendly. In Boston, Not so much. Even when she brought up, when she engaged me in line at Whole Foods, I was like, why is this lady talking to me? Like, this doesn't happen here. Nippy, as you probably know,
Yes.
people are way more,
A little more abrasive.
careful.
Yeah.
So that must have felt pretty nice.
Yeah, it felt great and it felt weird. So it was the seed of the cognitive dissonance that I will say, I was aware of my cognitive dissonance from start to finish, and my emotional need really overrode that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like a month-long grooming of a friendship, and then it really makes me laugh that at some point, because I was just pouring out my soul to her about all my problems and how I didn't understand the world. I gave her so much for the file, right? At one point, I actually said, is this all there is to life? Like, so stereotypical.
Why are we here?
Yeah, why are we here? And it was go time.
Yeah.
She was like, well, how would you like to meet other people who ponder these questions? I get together with friends on Tuesday and Thursday night. We talk about ideas. And again, she never talked about a group, right? She didn't say this was formal. Like I was picturing potluck dinner at someone's house. And then the next thing she said after I was like, sure, it's very important that you don't tell anyone about this. It's private just for you. So, like, screaming sirens there.
Right.
And then she, a few weeks later, I don't remember the time frame, I met up with her and the group leader at the time. It was this guy, Robert, at Pete's Coffee. We had, I guess, a conversation. It was more like Robert was pontificating. Which is described more in the book. Then at the end of that conversation, Robert invited me to a quote unquote free 5-week experiment. So, again, another red flag. But I was like, okay, why not? It can't hurt. It's free. I'll leave if I want to. And I will also say that looking back on that, given what Robert brought up during that conversation, after I left and I realized that I was just being had from start to finish, I realized that Robert came into the conversation armed with information about me because, he brought up certain things that I was like, oh, I must have confessed that to Lisa. And then that was the woman who recruited me. And then she told him.
So you felt really seen and validated and like it was in alignment or maybe meant to be even.
Yes, it had that magical quality, oh my God, this is so amazing. And nothing was working in my life. And I was like, oh, maybe I found the answer. I mean, it's just right out of the cult playbook.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you do join the group, what did you think that you were signing up for? What was the thing that was being sold to you that you agreed to on the outside?
It was, I guess, a philosophy group, and it was based around what were pitched as ancient ideas that had been passed along through an oral teaching. And it was pitched as tools, these ideas are tools so that your life is better. And the whole pitch about evolving, right? I mean, every cult kind of pitches this understated superiority, right? Like we are going to refine our vibrations, which was very much loaded language from the group, and eventually be floating above other human beings. And they didn't say it that way, but I mean, I'm being kind of facetious, but that really is what you get pitched.
Right.
And it sounded great since, I was not functioning very well.
You weren't functioning, let alone floating. Now you have an opportunity to float. Sounds great.
Yeah, I had a community and they were all going to support me. So, in the first class, we were told to set what were called 5-week Ames. And they were very prescriptive. You had to follow a certain script, which I don't know if Nixium had scripts like that.
Well, we had Goals Lab, which was kind of like, this is your plan, these are your next steps, what gets in the way, we work on what gets in the way, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So similar, except we had to stand up and state our aims. My aim is to fill in the blank.
Right.
Do this thing for a certain number of times. It always had to be measurable, right?
Us too.
Of course.
Yeah. If it's not measurable, you can't state it because then how do you know you've achieved it?
Right. Exactly. To be able to count it and, by the end of the 5 weeks. And of course, that ended up being a setup because if you didn't make your aim, I would like to say that school was a slow boil for me. And my impression that it was slower in Boston than New York. I think New York moved a little faster, but at first it was like, oh, I'm going to get support if I don't make the same. But of course, after a while, it becomes a way to shame people.
Right.
Right.
It was clear, though, and I really relate to this as well, just how lovely it was. I love the term you use in your book, having cheerleaders around you.
Yeah.
And I think that's, for me, I don't know if that would have been for you, but it was certainly would have been a good thing that I would have clung on to for a long time.
Yeah. And I think there was a parallel there with NXIVM, right? Like there was a lot of cheerleading at first.
We always talk about like what was some of the good things at first, because there has to be good. Otherwise, why you'd leave. What were some of the other positives that drew you in those initial months?
Yeah. The initial months, again, less slow boil, at least for me, was the love bombing was kind of extended. I almost feel like the love bombing extended through the first year for me. So I'm feeling shitty about myself, and I'm surrounded by people who are supportive, who are cheering me on, who are kind, who are telling me how smart I am and how creative and how talented I am. And I will say that the ideas, which all come from Gurdjieff, if you're familiar with him, I mean, Spencer's episode probably talks about that. The ideas really resonated with me. For example, there's an idea called multiplicity. And the way it was pitched was, look, we're not unified beings. We have this cast of characters, revolving around, and we don't even know who's taking the wheel. We don't even know who's in control, So what we're doing here in school is we're observing our many eyes, as in capital I, so that we can eventually unify, although it's nearly impossible to do that. And you definitely can't do it without school. So that's the rabbit hole you're falling down. But the idea of, there are many parts of me really made sense.
I actually think that's true.
This is where it gets tangly.
Yeah, I still kind of believe something like that. I just did a meditation thing about like the different monkey minds. I'm like, oh, there's my looking for the gold star monkey, and there's my planning control the universe monkey. Like that's not really me, right? That's just a strategy. Yeah. Right. So that's the kind of thing I think where NXIVM and school gave you some tools to be like, give you a lot of awareness and insight, which can be really valuable. Then you kind of cling to that. Right. Mm-hmm. And then you start to feel dependent.
Yeah. Then you start to feel dependent. And I think, yes, we do have many parts. And, if you know anything about internal family systems, it's a system of therapy that uses that concept. But the difference between internal family systems and school is that internal family systems wants you to get to know all those parts so that they can start communicating with each other. And school just used it as like kind of a shredder,
right?
Oh, you've got all these different parts. How you're fucked up.
Yeah, and bring in some shame about that.
There's something wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
Used to weaponize feeling bad. Yeah, so that you have to keep coming to school.
Right, exactly. You have to keep coming to school. We have the ideas. The teachers have been doing the work longer than you. That was, a buzz phrase. And they know you better than you know yourself.
Oh, that's such a red flag.
That's brutal.
Yeah. And look, I came into the school feeling like there was something wrong with me because as a gentle soul, I'd been told my entire life that I was too sensitive and I think too much. And why can't I change that? And why can't I be more tough?
Was that the same thing as the essence flaw?
I would say so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about it that way, Sarah.
Can you explain to the audience what essence flaw was explained as?
Essence flaw, everyone has an essence flaw. And part of the work, which makes me laugh because I think every cult uses the phrase the work.
You have to do the work.
Part of the work was uncovering the essence flaw and then using the ideas to, I don't know if alleviating the essence flaw, or, addressing it. I can't remember exactly, but, we all had that essence. First, we had to figure out what the essence flaw was, right?
And the essence being who you are really, and the flaw being sort of your go-to pattern that takes you away from yourself?
Yeah.
It sounds like it just makes being human flawed.
Yes, that's exactly right. In essence was pitched as we begin in essence in the starry world. This is actually the origin story that Robert told me when I met with him for the first time.
You got to have a preamble and a pitch, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His preamble was that we begin as essence in the starry world. We really don't belong here, which was the thing that I know Lisa prepped him with, because that was my ongoing kind of feeling. Like, I don't feel like I belong here. I don't get this planet. I don't get how to navigate it. And we choose parents and we come into the world. We're born into the world to discover what our essence flaw is and then address it. And by the way, because we choose our parents, if your parents are abusive, well, that's because you chose abusive parents, right?
Ugh.
So as soon as you're a
man.
baby, you're responsible for,
So you're blamed already.
all the shitty things that might have happened.
Right. Shame on them. This podcast certainly would not be happening without our amazing, supportive, generous patrons. Are you with us? Come find us over on Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty for bonus episodes, ad-free and exclusive content, and the occasional Zoom with fan favorites from our past episodes, Q&As, and all sorts of goodies. It's fun over there, people.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
You've heard from our sponsors. Now let's get back to A Little Bit Culty, shall we?
You've just mentioned a bunch of red flags, which leads us to the section of what were some of the other red flags. We've summed up this flaw.
So the shelf is growing.
The shelf is growing. We've got the secret files. There was a line in your book which I really resonated with as well, which is, because it's not that you didn't question, it had been shut down. And what you'd said was, mostly I stewed in uncertainty, thinking this feels wrong, but there must be something I don't understand yet. And that sums up so many moments for me, just being like, oh, this isn't right. Okay, I must be missing something. I'll stick it out.
If you think about this pitching of the teachers know you better than you know yourself, which starts coming in very early on because they've been doing the work longer.
Mm-hmm.
It sets you up for that thought and that feeling of, there must be something I don't get. Maybe if I try a little harder, I'll get it.
Right.
Maybe I'm not doing the work correctly. And it grows that dependence on these higher ups and on the group that's so toxic.
Yeah. When people buy into that at the beginning, it's a setup for the rest. There's certain foundational things you have to agree to, for them to really get you. And that is one of them, that the hierarchy exists and they know more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, they would have to, because it's how extreme belief systems get a foothold, religion. And then there's always something that has omniscience that you don't, and you're trying to obtain.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's always vague. It's never explicit, right?
It never is. And I think, it's funny because I'll joke around and call my experience cult light, but the insidiousness of it is really dark.
It is, yeah.
And there's always that bottom line message, like if you're buying into, these teachers know me better than I do, you can't trust your own perceptions.
Right.
You can't trust your own feelings. In fact, the feelings are proof that, your essence flaw is taking over, or your suspicious eyes are sabotaging the work. That was also, a buzz phrase.
And what they're constantly pushing on is your conscience and your doubt and your red flags and all that. That is you, your essence flaw or whatever, is the conscience that they're constantly pushing the boundary on and getting you to doubt yourself, which they've made bad through essence, conscience, and all these terms. So any doubt that you start to have is evidence of your guilt to them. And they're pointing that out to you as you go along until you go, wait a minute, no, this is me and what you're doing. And it takes a little bit for you to, if you've put the trust in them, it takes a little bit for you to go, I have a shelf here, right?
Yeah.
Then that's the moment, at least, in the conversations and the experience I had, is you start to go, oh my God.
Yes.
You're the villain.
Yeah.
And that's when you have the horror moment. And to your point, like, yes, we joke around about it, but I think it's important to really reiterate to our audience and underscore that it is an insidious, dark force, and it creeps up on you and it creeps up onto you. The next thing you know, your conscience isn't yours. And it is, but it's not, like, it's been messed with. And you're aligned with some extreme, like, this is the way type beliefs that just don't feel right, I guess is what I'm getting at. And they are meticulously doing it. There's a great Bob Dylan lyric, their minds were mismanaged with great skill. And it's very hard for the person being manipulated to think that they got, quote, outsmarted, because it messes with your pride and your sense of self and your ego. How could I fall for this? And they know that too.
Especially as a songwriter. I mean, that's Dylan. Fuck, what a genius.
Yeah.
For people who want to know your full journey, and I think you articulate it so well, and also the book is so educational because you're relating it to all the things we talk about in this podcast, very specific dynamics. This is an example of isolation.
Well, even just the lack of reciprocity on obtaining information, that's weird, but you're also feeling good because someone's interested in you.
The love bombing.
There's a lot of things going on.
Yes,
there's recruitment.
There's a long journey there in your five.
The secrecy they add right away. Like, there's so many things.
The secrecy is big.
Yeah. But you talk about how, like, the last 3 years you were really mired in that doubt, but still trusting them overall. Eventually the shelf breaks, partially thanks to your husband. Tell us about how you woke up.
Okay, so I think it's important to clarify that my husband
was not in the cult.
He was not in the cult, and the weird thing is, I mean, there were a lot of things that seemed magical, right? Like, I get into this group, and then my husband Chris and I started dating. So I was like, oh my God.
The tools work.
Yes. I attributed it to school, right?
Of course.
Because for the first time ever, I was like, this is a really serious, committed relationship. And it's not going to blow up because he's not a drama guy. And so he was never in the group, but we were not supposed to talk about this group at all. And for whatever reason, this is really early on, I told him, I go to this thing every Tuesday and Thursday. And he said, like, a good partner would, if this thing is helping you, it's none of my business, right? So throughout our dating, our engagement, our marriage, which happened in 2009, and I don't know, like maybe 6 months after my dad died. So that was a really strenuous year, a really charged year. This kooky, weird group is lurking in the background, right? And I would say that I went in there hoping that I would function better. And 2.5 years in, my functioning starts to decline.
So it was good at first, but then it starts to be problematic.
Yeah. My essence flaw within the context of the group was really focused on work and money and getting jobs and keeping jobs and all of that. And, that was kind of the focus of what was wrong with me, So I meet my husband and then I get a normal job and that job sucked. And then I lose that job and then I get another job and I'm earning more money, so it looked like it was working and I was attributing all of that to the group. But then 2.5 years in, that all started to unravel. And of course, at that point, I thought, well, that's because I'm not trying hard enough. You can never try hard enough in a cult, right? So 2.5 years in, on to the end, he was watching me decline. I'm losing weight. I can't sleep. I can't think straight. Like when you were talking before, Nippy, I was thinking of the word shredded. Like my mind literally felt shredded. And, this idea of the many eyes, instead of becoming a path to more cohesiveness in my thinking and clarity just ripped my psychology apart. And at the same time, the cognitive dissonance in me was really, really ramping up. Like it never really turned off, because I was aware enough of myself to know that I was falling apart. And I was like, but I thought this thing was supposed to help me. Maybe I'm not trying hard enough, right? You see the kind of the vicious circle of that. So I really was getting to a point where I thought I can't do this anymore. And somehow I think Chris just instinctively, well, first of all, he found information online and he just instinctively knew when to step in because, as you know, it's a timing thing.
Yes.
He might have confronted me a year earlier and I would have dug my heels in more.
Right.
But I was at a crisis, a mental health crisis. If I had gone to an ER, trust me, they would have been like, we're going to check in, So it was a Thursday night and, I had gone to my class and I came home and we were just unwinding. In fact, we were falling asleep in bed. And all of a sudden he said to me, I have to tell you something. I have a confession. And then he told me like he had found all these complaints online and they lined up with his experience about this crazy group, the money, these all-night parties that we used to throw, things like that. He said, what is Odyssey Study Group? And, I was freaking out, first of all, because he was being so direct. It's not really his style, because I think I really wanted him. I was looking to be saved, right? I was looking for someone to say, what is going on with you? But I had never heard of Odyssey Study Group. Now, mind you, I'd been writing checks to them for 5 years, but I wrote the checks out to OSG, and I never asked, what is OSG? Why? Because I knew that I shouldn't. Like no one said you shouldn't find out what this means, but I knew. But he said, what is Odyssey Study Group? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, how about OSG? And I was like, holy shit. And then he said, I went to your checkbook and I looked at your ledger. And then he said, are you sure you're not being manipulated? And at that point, because I'm falling apart, I was like, I don't know. And if you have to say, I don't know, then you're probably being manipulated, right?
It's strength to say that you don't know.
Thank you for saying that. I couldn't say to him, no, I'm not being manipulated, And I was like, I don't want to feel like I'm being manipulated, but I can't, legitimately say that these people aren't fucking with me. And it kind of unraveled from there. I didn't go back after that. And it became very clear to me too that my marriage was going to fall apart if I stayed with this group.
Tell us about the sunrise the next day.
Oh, okay. So I guess this was kind of over the course of the weekend because this was Thursday night. And then the next day I called a teacher and then the teacher was like, oh, I have to talk to Robert. And then, she called me later. And by the way, we never had teachers' phone numbers. We left messages on their voicemails and they would call us back, right? So there's that one-way street of communication control. And, the message that Robert sent through this teacher was, your husband needs to mind his own business and you need to tell him that. And that was really the shelf-breaking moment for me because I was like, I can't say that to him. This is his business.
Good for you.
So insomnia, right? And then I think it was Monday morning, actually, at I don't know, it was maybe 4:30. The sun was not up. I just woke up and it was like I could see, little rays of light coming through the window. And it was, I literally felt like it yanked me out of bed. It was like, get up, you have to get up. And I got up and I threw on a pair of sweats and I walked to a park and there's a soccer field and, there's a path around the soccer field. And I just kept circling it. And there was an avalanche of realizations coming at me. I was like, okay, I have to decide, should I stay or should I go? And then I was like, there's no one I can talk to. I can't turn to the teachers. They have an agenda. I can't call friend because I've kept this secret from everyone. Nobody knows what, I've had this secret life going on. And then realizing how fucked up that was, right? And then I'm watching the sunrise and I hear Robert in my head saying, this is a thing that he would say when people disappeared, so-and-so will regret leaving the source. And I'm like, yeah, but that's the source. I'm watching the source rise. And I'm looking at people walking their dogs, who seem quite happy, nature and the trees. And I'm like, the source is available without having to pay $350 a month to it. And without having to be verbally, ripped to shreds. That's the source. And suddenly, like that shelf it more than broke, it like splintered. It was like the pieces were flying everywhere. So, I left a message with my teacher saying, I need to talk to Robert, and she was not happy. And then I had a last conversation with Robert, which was so batshit. I don't know if if we have time for me to get into that, but if you want me to, I will describe it.
Can you summarize it quickly?
The brief summary is that he was trying to blame my husband, right? It's this terrible thing your husband's done to you. And that didn't work. And when that didn't work, he suddenly had this attack of empathy where he said, I'm trying to put myself in your husband's shoes. And I was like, seriously, dude? Like, you're supposed to be the evolved one. And you don't understand why my husband's worried about me? So, I was done. Like the veil had been ripped back. The curtain had been ripped away because I saw him as a con man, finally, in that moment. So, that's enough, I think, to say about how my exit unfolded.
For more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and at most bookstores. If you want to see that story in streaming form, watch both seasons of The Vow on HBO.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
You've heard from our sponsors. Now let's get back to a little bit culty, shall we?
So at this point, I imagine there's got to be a process of reclaiming yourself and your identity.
I know this isn't the case for so many former members, but there's just so much that, again, still lines up with my magical thinking. So it's still there. I think that's part of the gentle soul. But Chris and I drove from Massachusetts to North Carolina, literally the next week. And I don't think I talked the entire time. South Carolina, I was looking out the window and the movie was replaying back to me, and I started seeing just how batshit everything they required of me was, and how calculated it was, and how I don't want to say this in a self-blaming way, but it was important for me to think, oh my God, I allowed them to tell me what to say and what not to say. I kept their secrets, and then I started to see the ripple effect of damage, right? So if I'm keeping their secrets, it's not helping me, it's protecting them. And it's also hurting my husband, and it's hurting my friends, because they're all thinking, what's going on? How come you're not available, right? So there was an avalanche of realizations, which led to, they took advantage of this empathicness, this over responsibility of gentle soulness. And I was like, first of all, if I'm not going to protect myself, no one else will. And it starts with accepting that this is how I am. It's not going to change. And not only is it not going to change, it shouldn't change, because Nippy, as you said in the beginning, we need more people in this world who are sensitive, empathic, and thoughtful. And that's when I really started protecting myself. And, protecting myself, and this is where the Gentle Souls Revolution comes in. It means boundaries. It means saying,
Yep.
No, that's not going to work for me. If you have an agenda, then take it somewhere else. And that's what I have learned. And ironically, I'm not so much of a gentle soul as I used to be, but it's only because I have to protect that proclivity you know?
Well, the gentle soul needs the boundaries. That's what allows it to thrive, I would argue.
Exactly. And when you do protect that gentle soul with boundaries, it's your strength.
Yeah.
That's the gift that you bring into the world.
One of the things I love about your book is how you show how that particular proclivity makes you vulnerable to predators.
Yeah.
Talk to us about your self-education on the other side. I really appreciate how the book brought in other resources and case studies, including our story and International Church of Christ and One Taste and Jehovah's Witness and all sorts of things. You really draw on all this self-education from documentaries and other memoirs. But I'm sure you know, as we all know here on this podcast, that the world is still culting. The cultiverse is still thriving.
Yes.
What chaps your ass the most about your cult or cults in general?
Victim blame. I think that's what chaps my ass the most. And, that is a societal thing. I think that's why so many people don't speak out. That enables perpetrators to keep on keeping on.
Yep. Very much agree. So do you still have friends in?
No, because a big part of my story was how much I hated recruitment because, of course, after a while, we're supposed to all go out and make new friends, right?
Friends with a quote around it.
Yeah. Yes. Friends. I actually did recruit a friend. And then when I got out and I started having that avalanche, I did everything I could to extract my friend John from this group. And the funny thing is, and this is too much of a story to tell right now, but he not only left, but he orchestrated this whole thing and took half his class with him.
Great.
It was actually funny, but, beyond that, people who are in the group, they can't really talk to me, right? I'm persona non grata.
Yeah.
You're suppressive.
So, yeah.
You actually did the work and you get shunned for doing the work.
Chris and I always joke that I graduated and that graduated from school.
Yeah, you did graduate. Actually, that reminds me, I really love how in your book you talk about what do you know as ethical leadership. That's in our book. It's going to be called the green flags. And one of them was that you can graduate from this course.
They want you to graduate.
They want you to graduate and there's an end date. This group does not have an end date. The bar keeps changing. The target keeps shifting. Right. What are some of the other, we don't have to give it all away, so I hope people read the book, but some of the other things you encourage people to look for ethical leadership?
Most courses have a syllabus or an outline, right? There has to be some kind of transparency about not only is there an end date, but here are the things that we're going to cover. You have to be able to ask questions if you're getting attacked because you're asking questions or pushing back. Probably a red flag, right? An ethical leader will be able to graciously hear questions and respond to them without ripping you to shreds. If you are having some kind of tension or issue with a leader, it's not going to be a public display, right? There's not going to be this, you'll have a private conversation. It's not going to be a group takedown or feeding frenzy, as I like to call it.
Yeah.
So those are a few things, that jump to mind for me immediately. But I think there's an end date is really important because, a cult's not going to tell you we expect you to stay forever. We expect you to devote your life to this group.
The book was such a great example of what I think we learned from Stephen Hassan originally in one of our first episodes, which is that when you sign up, if you had a description of what it would be 5 years later, would you sign up?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be probably a no.
Yeah. It would probably be a no. When you think about, what I thought it was when I first started, a bunch of people getting together to talk about ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't expect it to become super rigid, and I didn't expect it to take up more and more time out of my life. I guess that's another thing, ethical leadership is going to respect your time.
Yeah.
And that you have a life and a family and things to do outside of whatever it is,
There's so many similarities. I think we talked about this with Spencer. Everything from the lavish holiday parties to the way people were publicly shamed for asking questions and things like that. One of the things I also see as a flaw with both in terms of how they lost people is it really does seem difficult to maintain this type of secrecy or privacy and then also be in the, quote, real world. That seems like it's both of their downfalls ultimately. If you have people on the outside going, what's going on there? And what are you doing? As long as you maintain a foot in reality, there's only so much they can get you.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And, I think it nods at a really important thing, in terms of recovery, which is the importance of your organic community, your friendships, your family. Loneliness is a real vulnerability because humans aren't wired to be so isolated.
Right. And as you say in your book, we're also wired to trust because you have to trust to like work together to survive. So
how's your trust different now?
I'm so much more careful. And I say that knowing that there are still ways in which I'm very naive and I still catch myself trusting someone and then looking back on maybe a conversation and going, oh, that person was fucking with me and I didn't even notice, But I'm much more careful in that I don't reveal as much. I tell my clients, like, go forward in life. You don't want to mistrust people, right? Like, you don't want to look at every person as though they're going to take advantage of you. That's a real miserable life. But less is more. You got to let people prove themselves to you. So if I'm meeting someone, I'm not going to pour my heart out right away like I did with Lisa.
Yep. Oh, been there.
Yeah. Or if oversharing, or if I'm having conflict with someone that I don't know that well, I'm going to just share just what's necessary. I'm not going to go into, well, I was thinking that when you said this, I kind of felt like that, no, don't do that.
That's me.
You might want to say like, look, I need X. That's why this isn't working.
Right.
I wish I could give you a good example right now, but you get the
It's
idea.
okay. No, Nippy's really good at like, I even got asked to be like the team, like the parent coordinator for the Troy school. And my instinct was like, oh, that's so glad, like, thank you. I'd love to. And I ran it by Nippy because I'm trying to like not make impulsive decisions like that anymore. He's like, absolutely not. You don't have time for that. And as soon as I said no, I felt so relieved, but I also felt bad. Like I was over explaining and like all the reasons why I couldn't do it.
But a no to that is a yes to yourself. That's how you have to look at it.
Yes, I'm learning.
Yeah, that's perfect, Nippy. And it's a perfect example, Sarah, where you felt guilty about it.
Yeah.
So you were, well, I can't because blah, blah, blah. And really all you need to say is, you know what, I'd love to, but it's just not going to work.
Yeah. Practicing. Yeah, practicing.
Well, it's a muscle. It's a muscle you have to practice, Yeah. And I think I've gotten pretty good at it, but I do fall. Look, it's my natural wiring. I fall back into it at times, And I guess that's another thing is like you forgive yourself for, falling back into those things and then dial it back again.
Yeah. Well, I really do encourage our listenership to read your book. It will be on Audible, and we'll also be sure to interview you or use part of this interview for our coming book that we're working on, which we haven't even really announced to our audience yet. But yeah, a similar format of ours is not memoir. I already did the memoir thing, is more prescriptive for healing. Make sure we cover the gentle soul concept. Because I think that
that's fantastic.
A lot of people will relate. And your book is so educational. I just have to make one small correction about Keith Raniere just to end on a funny note.
Yeah.
And I know we went back and forth and I like verified most of the things that you said, but there's one line that you said about Keith saying like he was a humanitarian, but then he said like, how dare you work in a soup kitchen if you want to be a humanitarian because you're just trying to feel good, which was sort of true, but it was even more insidious than that. What he did is he never would say, how dare you, or you're bad. It would be more like, what does it mean if... so that the person would have to say it themselves. Oh my God, I'm so selfish. But it was specifically, the question was, if you're a humanitarian and you want to help hungry people and you're a lawyer and you can make $200 an hour, what's the way to help most people?
Okay, talk about word salad.
Yeah, so we're talking about word salad, but the conclusion that we came to in the class was, well, if you really want to help the most people, you donate money. You donate $200. If you want to, you donate $400, 2 hours, like an hour of your time is $200. That $200 can buy a lot of carrots and potatoes for the soup. Wow. If you're a lawyer and you go spend an hour and serve people soup, then you're just being selfish. So that was the natural conclusion we came to, that if we were true humanitarians, you wouldn't do the selfish thing. You would do the thing that would yield more help.
Depending on why you're doing it.
Right. But that was sort of the underlying thing, is like, be honest about why you're doing it. It wasn't like, how dare you serve soup? It would just be like, well, if you're going to serve soup, admit that you're doing it to feel good, not to help people.
I see.
Right. So
and
it was like
a battering ram, that that you're not being honest.
Yeah. So they'd be like, so what does it mean about you if you're choosing to just feel good and serve soup versus give money and help more people? It was more subtle. That was my only correction.
It wasn't quite as blatant.
No, he wouldn't say, how dare you? That sounds like a Sharon Gans quote. How dare you? Is she British? I picture her British. Oh my God. My theater nerd in me would have loved that group. I love the Shakespeare. I love the performances.
Yeah, for sure.
I would have been all over that group.
Yeah. And I think the theater came in more in New York than it did in Boston, but we definitely talked about Shakespeare. I think at one point somebody said, it has been said that Shakespeare was in a school.
Of course.
So
Shakespeare studied Gurdjieff and
yes.
Ostensky. Is that how you say his name?
Ouspensky.
Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
And Ostensky. Anyway.
We read Dostoevsky too, by the way.
What are you doing now and where can people find you?
Okay. So my website is gentlesoulsrevolution.com. I have a therapy practice that is mostly focused on cult recovery, though not all of my clients come from that background. That's my job.
So people who are, because we have survivors writing in all the time looking for therapists that we recommend. So we recommend you, Esther.
Well, thank you. And, that's mostly it. I mean, I'm still trying to be artistic and do music. And, that's just kind of the cherry on the top of the cake here, that I do as much music as I can in between all of this obsessive cult, whatever, fill in the blank, right?
Advocacy.
It's endless.
Yeah, it is endless. Yeah. There's always more to do. But I think that the world is better with your voice in it. So I appreciate you writing this book and spending time with us. And we shall keep in touch. It's nice to finally have a proper conversation with you after all these years.
Yeah. And thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Esther.
Thanks, Esther.
Thank you, Nippy. Thank you, Sarah.
Like what you hear, do you? Give us a rating, a review, and subscribe on iTunes. Every little bit helps us get this cult awareness content out there. Smash that subscribe button. You know you want to. I hope you got some good wisdom from that chat with Esther Friedman. She's also a board member of the newly formed nonprofit Living Cult Free and is joined in that endeavor by some culty recovery heavyweights. You can learn more about their work at livingcultfree.org.
You can also get more info on Esther in our show notes. If you're a Patreon member, let us know all your thoughts about this episode over on Patreon or leave us a voicemail at littlebitculty.com/voicemail because we love hearing from you.
And we love ratings and reviews because when we get ratings and reviews, the algorithm also loves us, I guess.
So leave us a review, won't you? And while you're in your podcast platform, make sure you're following the show. Apple did a weird thing where it kicked a bunch of people off the subscriptions.
Apple.
And we'd like to get you back on. Until then,
see you next time.
Boom sauce.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We're heading over to patreon.com/alittlebitculty now to discuss this episode. In the meantime, dear listener, please remember, this podcast is solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. It's not intended as a substitute for real medical, legal, or therapeutic advice. For cult recovery resources and to learn more about seeking safely in this culty world, check out alittlebitculty.com/culty resources and don't miss Sarah's TED Talk called How Cult Literate Are You? Great stuff.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production, executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound and our co-creator and show chaplain/bodyguard, Jess Tardy. Our show writer is Holly Zadra, and our theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant.
That's the sound of your current hype level at the gas pump. But brace yourself for something fuel nominal, because Unleaded 88 is about to take the hype to a whole new level. Unleaded 88 is cheaper, cleaner, and greener than regular unleaded. Plus, it's homegrown, making Unleaded 88 the clear choice at the pump and totally worth the hype. So pump it up with Unleaded 88, brought to you by Iowa Corn.